For 25 years, the Adeleke family had lived with a truth hidden in plain sight, one they never even thought to question. Charles Adeleke had spent months searching for the perfect heir, someone worthy of leading his empire. But the best choice wasn't his son Brian or his daughter Amanda. It was a man named Fortune, a man who, until recently, was nothing more than an employee in the company. A stranger, or so everyone believed. But Evelyn Adeleke knew the truth now. The weight of it sat heavy in her chest. The shock of what she had uncovered left her shaken. Fortune wasn't just an outsider. He was their son. Her son. The child she had once believed she had lost. The man Charles had unknowingly placed at the center of his search for an heir was their firstborn. Their real firstborn. And yet no one else knew. Not Charles. Not Amanda. Not Brian. Only Evelyn carried this truth. And for now, she had to keep it to herself. Her mind raced with questions she had no answers to. How had this happened? Evelyn knew exactly what had happened. She had always known her son was alive. She had made the decision herself. But what she had never expected was for his adoptive parents to place him so close to them all these years. Fortune had not grown up far away, living a life separate from theirs. He had been in their world the entire time. The Olus had never kept him hidden. They had not stolen him or taken him away to erase his past. Instead, they had woven him into the fabric of the Adeleke family's world. Long before anyone knew the truth, they had ensured that he went to the same elite schools as Amanda and Brian, that he played on the same sports teams, attended the same exclusive events, and built a future within the same powerful circles. And now, when the moment came for Charles to find his heir, Fortune was already right where he needed to be. None of it had been an accident. Evelyn's chest tightened. Had they known? Had the Olus always planned for this moment? Had they guided Fortune toward them, waiting for the truth to unfold naturally? Or had it simply been fate that led him back home? For 25 years, they had known exactly who he was. And yet, they had never told him. Never told anyone. Not out of greed. Not out of malice. But because they had made a choice to protect a child whose own parents had once been powerless to protect him. Now, with the truth in her hands, Evelyn had to make a choice of her own. Would she tell Charles immediately? Would she tell Fortune? Or would she wait until she knew how to put the pieces of their past back together without breaking everything apart? Now, with the truth revealed, the question remained. Had they done the right thing? And more importantly, what happened next? The couple that adopted the child had never kept him away from his true family. From the moment they brought him home, they knew who he was. They did not see themselves as replacing his parents but as protectors, people who had stepped in when Charles and his wife had no choice. They never spoke of the truth, never revealed what had happened in that hospital room all those years ago. But they also never kept him hidden. Instead, they placed him in the Adeleke family's world from the very start. As a child, they ensured he went to the same schools where Charles Adeleke's children studied. He played on the same sports teams, attended the same events, and grew up surrounded by the same circles. As he got older, they guided him toward opportunities that would put him closer to the family, closer to the father who never knew he existed. By the time he was old enough to work, it was no accident that he ended up in Charles Adeleke's company. Nothing had been left to chance. And when the opportunity came for someone to shadow Amanda and Brian, they knew it was the final step. The child they had raised was already part of the Adeleke world. He had always been. Now, all that remained was for the truth to reveal itself, naturally, as it was always meant to. Evelyn Adeleke sat in her car outside a quiet neighborhood, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The private investigator had given her the address earlier that day. The moment she saw it, she knew she had to go herself. She needed to see them with her own eyes. She took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. This was not just any visit. This was the meeting that would confirm everything, the truth that had been hidden for 25 years. Her heart pounded as she stepped out of the car. She walked up to the house and knocked gently. A few moments later, the door creaked open. Standing before her was the woman from the picture, the woman who had raised her son. Evelyn's breath hitched. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The older woman's eyes studied Evelyn, confused at first, then slowly widening in realization. "Mrs. Adeleke?" she asked cautiously. Evelyn swallowed hard, trying to keep her voice steady. "Please, can we talk? Privately." The woman hesitated, then nodded. She stepped aside and let Evelyn in. The house was simple but warm. It smelled of home-cooked meals and carried the comforting presence of a family that had built something with love. Evelyn felt a lump form in her throat. A man entered from another room, his brow furrowed in confusion. Evelyn recognized him instantly. These were the people she had trusted with her child all those years ago. The couple exchanged glances before turning to Evelyn, waiting for her to speak. She folded her hands in her lap, forcing herself to stay composed. "I know what you've done," she said softly. "I know you've raised him. I know who he is." Neither of them said a word. Evelyn exhaled sharply. "I just needed to be sure. I needed to see it with my own eyes." The woman, her son's adoptive mother, sighed deeply, as if she had been carrying a weight for years. "We never wanted to keep him from you. We only did what we thought was best." Evelyn nodded slowly. "I know." Her voice wavered. "And I don't regret the decision I made back then. If it hadn't been for you, I don't know what would have happened to him." She swallowed the lump in her throat and met their eyes. "But now I need time to figure out how to handle this. Please don't tell him yet. Don't tell anyone. Not until I figure out how to break it." The couple exchanged another glance before nodding. "We understand," the man said. Evelyn let out a shaky breath of relief. She had confirmed the truth, but she wasn't ready to face the storm that would come once the truth was revealed. For now, it had to remain a secret. Charles Adeleke sat on the couch, his elbows resting on his knees, his head in his hands. The room was quiet, but his mind was loud. Evelyn walked in and saw him like that. She didn't need to ask what was wrong. She already knew. She took a deep breath and sat beside him. "You're still thinking about it, aren't you?" she asked softly. Charles didn't look up. "I don't know what to do, Evelyn," he admitted. "I know Fortune is the best person for the job, but he's not my son. How do I explain to Amanda and Brian that I'm giving their inheritance to someone else?" Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest. This was the moment. She had to tell him. She reached for his hand and held it tightly. "Charles," she said carefully, her voice shaking, "what if I told you that Fortune is your son?" Charles lifted his head slowly. He looked at her with confusion. "What are you talking about?" Evelyn took a deep breath. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she pushed forward. "There's something I never told you. Something I have carried for 25 years. Charles's face changed. "Evelyn, what are you saying?" Her hands trembled as she wiped her tears. "That day, the day I gave birth, we had no money, Charles. The doctors said I needed surgery. You ran out to find the money, but before you came back, the doctor gave me a choice. He said if we gave up the baby, they would take care of my hospital bill. If we didn't, we could lose everything." Charles's body stiffened. His breathing became shaky. "Evelyn," she sobbed harder. "I was scared. I thought I was making the right choice. I thought I was saving our family. So I told them to take the baby. And when you came back, I told you he had died." Charles's hands covered his face. His shoulders shook. Evelyn reached for him, but she could barely see through her tears. "I know I should have told you. I wanted to. Every single day I wanted to. But I was too afraid." Charles dropped his hands. His face was wet with tears. "Are you telling me Fortune is our son?" Evelyn nodded, crying harder. "Yes, he's our firstborn. The baby we thought we lost. He's been with us this whole time, and we didn't even know." For a long time, Charles said nothing. He just sat there, staring at the floor. Then, slowly, he let out a shaky breath. "My son. Fortune is my son." Evelyn wiped her tears. "I know this is a lot, but now you don't have to struggle anymore, Charles. You don't have to choose between your children and the best leader. The best person for the company is your child." Charles closed his eyes, more tears slipping down his face. His son was alive, and all these years he had been right in front of him. The day had arrived. Charles and Evelyn had planned it carefully. They couldn't just tell Fortune the truth over the phone or in passing. It had to be done the right way, in person, with everyone who mattered present. So, they created a reason, a small company event, something that would make Fortune believe he was simply coming over with his parents to celebrate a business achievement. Fortune didn't suspect anything. When the invitation came, he assumed it was for the entire company. After all, it wasn't unusual for Charles Adeleke to host important gatherings. That evening, Fortune arrived with his parents, dressed neatly, expecting to see his colleagues. But the moment he stepped into the grand Adeleke mansion, he noticed something was off. The house was quiet. Too quiet. There were no other employees. No big crowd. Just Charles, Evelyn, Amanda, and Brian, all standing in the center of the room, waiting. Fortune glanced at his parents, confused. "Where is everyone?" he asked. His mother, standing beside him, looked nervous but said nothing. Charles cleared his throat and took a step forward. "Fortune, we didn't invite the company. This meeting is about something else. Something important." Fortune frowned. "What do you mean?" Before Charles could speak, Evelyn turned to Fortune's mother, her eyes already filled with emotion. Without hesitation, Evelyn stepped forward and pulled the woman into a tight embrace. The room fell silent. Amanda and Brian exchanged confused looks. Fortune's mother froze for a moment, then slowly hugged Evelyn back. There was a deep familiarity in their embrace, something that neither Amanda nor Brian could understand. Amanda's eyes narrowed. "Do you know each other?" Evelyn pulled away, her eyes red. She turned to Fortune, her voice trembling. "Yes, we know each other." Fortune took a step back, his confusion growing. "What's going on?" Charles let out a deep breath, his eyes locking onto Fortune's. "There's something you need to know." Evelyn nodded, wiping her tears. She turned to Fortune's adoptive parents, silently asking for permission to continue. They nodded in return. With her voice shaking, Evelyn began to speak. She told the story, the hospital, the complications during childbirth, the impossible decision she had made, the lie she had told Charles, the pain she had carried for years. As she spoke, Fortune's eyes widened. His breathing became unsteady. Amanda and Brian sat frozen, their faces pale as they listened. And then came the words that changed everything. "Fortune, you are our son." The room went completely still. Fortune's hands trembled at his sides. His heart pounded so hard it hurt. He couldn't speak. He couldn't move. Charles took a step toward him, his voice filled with emotion. "We didn't know. We had no idea. But we know now, and we need you to know too." Amanda's hand shot to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Brian looked like he had been struck by lightning. Fortune's mother, the woman who had raised him, loved him, cared for him his entire life, reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "This is the truth, my son," she whispered. "We always knew one day you would find your way home." Tears slipped down Fortune's face. He had never imagined this, never questioned where he came from, never thought his past was anything but ordinary. And yet, here he was, looking at Charles, at Evelyn, at his real parents. Everything he thought he knew about himself had just changed. Fortune stood frozen, his mind spinning. The words hung in the air, but they didn't feel real. He was their son? His whole life, he had never questioned where he came from. He had never doubted the love of the parents who raised him. And now, in a matter of minutes, everything had changed. He tried to speak, but his throat felt dry. His heart pounded so loudly that he could barely hear anything else. Across the room, Amanda and Brian were just as stunned. Amanda's hands were still covering her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. She looked from Fortune to her parents, then back at Fortune. Brian, on the other hand, had stepped back, shaking his head slightly, as if refusing to believe what he had just heard. Silence filled the room. Fortune swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. This has to be a mistake." Evelyn took a shaky step forward. "It's not a mistake, son. It's the truth." Fortune flinched at the word son, felt foreign coming from her. Amanda finally lowered her hands. You're telling me that all this time, Fortune was our brother? And we never knew? Charles nodded, his face full of emotion. We didn't know either. We thought he was gone. Brian let out a sharp breath, rubbing the back of his head. This is crazy, he muttered. This doesn't make any sense. Evelyn turned to him, her eyes pleading. I know it's a shock. I know this is a lot to take in. But it's the truth, Brian. Brian shook his head again, still trying to process everything. His entire life, he had been the firstborn son. He had always carried that responsibility. Now, in an instant, that was no longer true. Amanda, still in shock, turned to Fortune. What are you thinking? She asked hesitantly. Fortune looked at her, then at Charles, then at Evelyn. His hands were shaking. He didn't know what he was thinking. He didn't know what he was supposed to think. Everything he had ever known had just been rewritten. He had a different past, a different family, a different life than he had ever imagined. He took a slow, unsteady breath. I don't know, he finally said. His voice was raw, filled with emotion he didn't even understand yet. Evelyn took another step toward him, but he instinctively stepped back. I need time, he whispered. Amanda and Brian exchanged a glance. For the first time in their lives, they didn't know where they stood. And Fortune, he had just found his real family. But at that moment, he had never felt more lost. Amanda's reaction, the world falls apart. The room disappeared. The walls, the furniture, the people, they all ceased to exist. All Amanda could hear was a deafening ringing in her ears, drowning out every voice, every breath, every logical thought. Her knees buckled. She tried to steady herself, but her body wouldn't listen. She felt lightheaded, like the ground beneath her had tilted and sent her spiraling into some twisted, horrific nightmare. No, this couldn't be happening. She turned, her breath shuddering, and her eyes landed on him. Fortune, the man who had been slowly, secretly, becoming something more to her. The man whose presence had stayed with her even after long work hours. The man she had imagined things with. And now her brother? Amanda's stomach twisted so violently she thought she might be sick. She stumbled back, away from him, one hand pressing to her chest, as if she could stop her heart from breaking apart inside her ribcage. No, she whispered, shaking her head rapidly. She could feel everyone's eyes on her, waiting for her to say something, anything. But what was there to say? How was she supposed to speak when her entire reality had just been rewritten? How was she supposed to breathe? Her fingers dug into her arms, trying to anchor herself to something, to anything, because this was too much. It was too much. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block it all out, trying to erase it. But she couldn't. She could still feel his eyes on her. She looked up, and when she met Fortune's gaze, it shattered her all over again. Because he looked the same way she felt. Broken. His lips parted slightly, as if he wanted to say something, to fix this. But there were no words that could undo this horror. There was no fixing this. Amanda let out a sharp, uneven breath. Her entire body felt cold, unsteady, foreign. She took another step back, and another. Her chest rose and fell too fast, too unevenly. She needed to get out of here, before she suffocated, before she collapsed. Because right now, all she could think about, all she could feel, was the gut-wrenching, life-shattering horror that the man she had been falling for might be her brother. Brian folded his arms and let out a sharp laugh, shaking his head. How convenient, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Very, very convenient. Everyone turned to him, but he was just getting started. You mean to tell me, he continued, looking at the Olus, that all these years you never thought to say a word? You just happened to wait until now, when my father is looking for an heir, to suddenly come forward with this story. His eyes burned with suspicion as he looked from Fortune to the Olus. Why now? Why not years ago? Where were you when we were growing up, when my father was building his empire? And now, when it's time to choose a successor, boom, you appear out of nowhere with some long-lost son. Amanda, who had been silent, rubbed her chin, clearly deep in thought. Brian wasn't finished. He took a step closer, pointing at Fortune. And how do we even know this is true? Just because you say so? Do you have proof? A DNA test? Something solid that proves you're really our brother? Stopped. He turned to Charles and Evelyn. Dad, are you seriously believing this? Just because they showed up and told a nice story? Evelyn wiped her tears. Brian, it's true, she said softly. I know it's hard to believe, but this is the truth. Brian let out a bitter laugh. No, what's hard to believe is that you're so quick to accept it. He turned back to Fortune, his face hard. I don't know what game you and your parents are playing, but I'm not falling for it. Until I see proof, real proof, I don't believe any of this. The room was silent. After Brian's outburst, the room disappeared. The walls, the furniture, the people, they all ceased to exist. All Amanda could hear was a deafening ringing in her ears, drowning out every voice, every breath, every logical thought. There was something else they had to say, something worse. Fortune spoke first, his voice low, shaky. There's something else. Amanda flinched. Her breathing was uneven. She didn't want to say it. She didn't want to speak the words aloud, because once she did, they would never be able to take them back. We didn't know. Her voice cracked. Fortune swallowed hard and looked away. He couldn't meet their parents' eyes. He could barely breathe. His heart slammed against his ribs like a war drum. Amanda squeezed her arms tightly around herself, as if holding herself together. We didn't know, Fortune said, forcing the words out. Amanda and I, we were. He couldn't finish. He didn't have to. The sheer horror in his parents' eyes said they already knew what he was trying to say. Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth, a strangled gasp escaping her lips. Charles's face darkened, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. Brian stiffened, his expression breaking into something resembling disgust and disbelief. Oh my God, Evelyn whispered. No, Charles barely managed to say. Amanda let out a shaky breath, her head shaking furiously as if she could will it all away. We didn't know. We had no idea. But she couldn't finish. The memories came crashing down. Fortune's lingering glances, their late-night conversations, the unspoken pull between them, the way she almost let herself fall. Charles pressed a hand to his forehead, exhaling sharply. He looked like he had just been punched in the gut. Evelyn stared at them as if seeing them for the first time, as if they were strangers, not her children. Brian's voice cut through the silence. Tell me this is some sick joke. Fortune's response was almost inaudible. I wish it was. Evelyn's voice trembled. How far? Amanda flinched. The weight of the question crushed her. Nothing happened, Amanda said quickly. Fortune's jaw was tight. We never crossed that line, but we were close. Evelyn covered her face with her hands, her shoulders trembling. Charles rubbed his temples, looking like he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Brian let out a sharp, humorless laugh. This is insane. Amanda turned on him, her emotions overflowing. You think I don't know that? You think I don't hate myself for it? Her voice cracked. Tears spilled over, but she wiped them away furiously. Fortune watched her, his own regret weighing him down like chains. Charles exhaled slowly, his voice hoarse. This is why the truth matters. He turned to Evelyn, shaking his head in grief. We thought we lost him, and in trying to move on, we almost let this happen. Evelyn nodded wordlessly, still unable to speak. Amanda was shaking, her hands balled into fists, trying to suppress the sobs threatening to overtake her. Fortune took a step back. I need air. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the room. Amanda stood frozen for a second, then followed. She needed to get out before she suffocated under the weight of it all. The sound of the heavy door closing behind them echoed in the silence left behind. Inside, Charles and Evelyn sat in stunned silence, the reality of what almost happened settling over them like a storm. Brian shook his head one last time before storming out, leaving his parents in the ruins of a truth they never saw coming. The next day, the room was thick with tension, suffocating, inescapable. No one moved. No one spoke. No one wanted to say what was on their mind, but the truth sat between them like a ticking bomb. They needed the DNA test, but none of them truly wanted to know the results. Amanda's stomach twisted painfully, and she wrapped her arms around herself as if it could hold her together. The truth was supposed to bring clarity, but all she felt was terror. If the test confirmed it, then everything she had felt, every moment she had shared with Fortune, would become something monstrous. Something that never should have happened. She wanted to run, to escape from the nightmare swallowing her whole. But there was nowhere to go. Fortune couldn't look at anyone. His hands were clenched at his sides, his entire body stiff with unease. A part of him wanted this to be true, to know where he came from, to finally have a real family. But another part of him, a deep, unspoken part, wished desperately that it wasn't. Because if it was, then Amanda would be lost to him forever. His jaw tightened. He had spent his life never questioning where he came from, never thinking for a second that his past held any mysteries. But now everything was a lie. Brian exhaled sharply, shaking his head as if trying to rid himself of the unease crawling under his skin. He had spent his whole life knowing his role, knowing that he was the one meant to inherit their father's legacy. But if this was true, if Fortune was their blood, then everything Brian had known, everything he had been raised to believe, would shift. He couldn't let that happen. "No," Brian finally said, his voice hoarse but firm. "We need proof." Evelyn's throat bobbed as she swallowed hard, nodding. "We'll do the test." Charles's hands tightened into fists on his lap. His jaw locked. His entire body screamed of a man trying to stay composed when everything inside him was unraveling. Because he wanted the test to confirm it. He wanted his son back. If it was true, then the boy he had thought was lost to them would finally be where he belonged. But if it was true, then Amanda and Fortune had nearly. Charles's fingers twitched. His heart was beating too fast, his mind spiraling. He couldn't think about that. Not right now. Not when his family was on the verge of breaking apart. Amanda let out a slow, shaky breath. Her hands curled into fists at her sides as she forced herself to stay upright. She didn't want the test. She didn't want to know. Because if it was true, she would never be able to look Fortune in the eye again. And if it wasn't, she didn't let herself finish the thought. The silence stretched unbearably. Finally, Fortune's voice cut through it, low and rough. "Let's get it over with." No one argued, because at that moment, none of them knew what outcome they were hoping for. The next morning, the entire family went to the hospital. The test was done. 2 days later, the results arrived. Fortune Adeleke, biological son of Charles and Evelyn Adeleke. It was official. The truth they had all been dreading, hoping for, fearing, and resisting was undeniable now. Fortune was truly their child. The moment Evelyn read the results, her breath hitched. Tears welled in her eyes as she clutched the paper, her fingers trembling. Charles took it from her hands, scanning the words over and over, as if hoping the outcome would somehow change. But it wouldn't. They had found their son. Amanda inhaled sharply, looking away as something heavy settled in her chest. She had spent days praying, begging, hoping for something different, but fate had been cruel. Fortune sat still, the weight of his entire existence crashing down on him. He had a family, a real one, but it came at the cost of something else, something he could never admit aloud. Brian exhaled, running a hand down his face. He should have been relieved. This meant Fortune wasn't some imposter trying to take what belonged to them. But it also meant his inheritance was no longer guaranteed. The silence stretched. No one knew what to say. For Amanda and Fortune, there was no relief. Just a quiet, devastating realization of what they had almost done. And now they had to live with it. The aftermath. At first, things were painfully awkward. Amanda, Brian, and Fortune had spent months working together, but now they had to adjust, to redefine everything. Not as colleagues, not as competitors, but as siblings. Amanda avoided Fortune at first. It was too much. The shame, the confusion, the grief of losing something she had never even had the chance to claim. But avoidance wasn't a solution. So one day, she forced herself to sit across from him, hands clenched together. "Where did you grow up?" she asked quietly. Fortune hesitated before answering. And for the first time they talked, not as almost lovers, not as strangers, but as family. It was slow. It was painful. But it was happening. Brian, despite himself, began to warm up too. His usual sarcasm returned, filling the spaces where tension once lived. And little by little, things shifted. Charles, however, had a new concern. Now that he had an heir, the company's future was secured. But he worried about how his children would move forward from here. Would Amanda and Brian resent Fortune? Would Fortune know how to lead them? One evening, Charles confided in his best friend. "You were struggling to pick an heir before," his friend said, pouring himself a drink. "Now that you have one, what's the problem?" Charles sighed. "It's not about the choice anymore. It's about how he'll handle Amanda and Brian. They grew up expecting to take over this business. And now, in a matter of weeks, everything has changed." His friend nodded. "Let me ask you something. Before you knew Fortune was your son, you trusted him, didn't you?" Charles hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." "Then trust him now," his friend said simply. "He's already proven he's a good leader. He'll figure it out." And the truth was, he was right. A new beginning. When Fortune officially took over Adeleke Group, he did something Charles hadn't expected. He didn't push Amanda and Brian aside. He didn't try to erase their roles or claim dominance. Instead, he included them. He studied them. He knew Brian was impulsive, quick to act, sometimes reckless. But risks weren't always a bad thing. So, Fortune put him in charge of high-stakes investments, where his boldness would be an asset, not a liability. Amanda, on the other hand, was structured, a perfectionist. She wanted everything done the right way, even if it meant being rigid. Fortune gave her a role overseeing company policies, ensuring every decision met the highest standards. He didn't see their flaws as weaknesses. He saw them as puzzle pieces that just needed to be placed in the right spot. And that was what made him not just a good businessman, but a great leader. Months passed, and for the first time in a long time, the Adeleke family was whole. Amanda still had her moments of sadness. There were days she caught herself looking at Fortune and remembering what could have been. But she was healing. They both were. Charles watched from the sidelines, knowing he had made the right decision. The empire he built was safe. But more importantly, his family was stronger than ever. And for the first time in years, Charles Adeleke could finally rest.